It is draft week, the most wonderful time of the year. Just got back from D'Amico Ryan's media availability. He had some really interesting things to say that we'll touch on a little bit later on SNL as well as on the night stream at 10:30. Will Anderson and CJ Stroud, who will be mentioned later on in this video, they also had some pretty interesting things to say. So be on the lookout for that here in the locker room as well as on SNL with Cody Stutz and I. While I was at the media availability, I was doing some reading leading up to the draft, and I saw that Albert Breer mentioned that Lions wide receiver Jameson Williams could be a guy that could be traded soon, before the season. Now, the deadline to pick up his fifth-year option is in about a week and a half on May 1st. We know that the Lions, they got a lot of good players. They got one of the best receivers in the league in Amon-Ra St. Brown. They got a lot of guys who they're going to have to pay relatively soon. And we know, and we're starting to learn around here, that good teams with good players, eventually you have to make tough business decisions and you have to say goodbye to guys that produce at a high level, which is exactly what Jameson Williams did last year. He surpassed 1,000 yards and he established himself as one of the most dangerous players on one of the best teams in the league. And if he is on the market, I have 5 reasons, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 reasons why the Texans should consider the Williams trade based on their needs, what's in front of them, and a little bit of what's behind them. So appreciate you for coming through. Let's get into these 5 reasons the Texans should consider a trade for Jameson Williams, assuming that the Lions are considering making this decision. Number 1 is the obvious need. We've talked about this for a while. Stephon Diggs thing did not go according to plan. He's gone. Tank Dell, you had the unfortunate injury. Wide receiver, even with the addition of Christian Kirk, wide receiver has been a need that we've talked about for a long, long time, that the Texans need more depth at wide receiver. Any of the draft nerds, anybody who knows this team, when you list the Texans' needs, wide receiver appears in the top 3. So there's an obvious need at wide receiver. And I think there's an obvious need for speed and playmaking in this wide receiving core. There's not enough separation happening. Maybe Christian Kirk adds a little bit of that, but he is nowhere in the same category as Jameson Williams when it comes to explosive playmaking. Quite frankly, there aren't a lot of guys that are. So the obvious need is reason number 1. Reason number 2 would be the cost from both point of views. We kind of briefly touched on the Lions and the fact that tough decisions are going to have to be made. They're already paying St. Brown. They're going to have to pay some other guys, eventually Aiden Hutchinson. Texans facing this same decision. But if the Lions know that Jameson Williams is not going to be part of their plans past this season, maybe you kind of get something for him and you kind of start that next phase a little bit early from their point of view. And from the Texans' point of view, look, we've seen the Texans rent Stephon Diggs for 1 year, and the cost was either a second-round pick or trading back 19 spots, however you want to look at it. But we've seen them rent Stephon Diggs, and the upside of the best-case scenario with Stephon Diggs was not even close to as high as it is with a guy like Jameson Williams, who's still in his 20s, probably still has his best football ahead of him. So if you're giving up a day 2 pick for Jameson Williams, there's a lot of upside in the fact that the Texans could make this move, and maybe it becomes a long-term move, and he and Nico Collins become the duo for CJ Stroud during the prime of his career. So the cost from both points of view, the Texans and the Lions, I think it's worthwhile, again, assuming that the Lions are willing to make this move. Reason number 3, the wide receiver position in the draft. So we've talked about the obvious need. Last year, wide receiver, the position was stacked. And at 25, you would probably feel pretty good about yourself if you were going to acquire a receiver. But for the Texans in this situation at 25, this is one of the most meh wide receiver groups in the first round. Does that mean it ends up being that way down the line? Who knows? But in this situation, you don't know if the value of the wide receiver position at 25 is going to be worth taking. And if you are trading whatever it takes to get Jameson Williams, whether it's a third and maybe a little bit more, whether it's a second, which might be a little bit too much, the wide receiver position in the draft is just not what it usually is. So when we talk about that need, acquiring that need via the draft, easier said than done. And you're getting an established guy in Jameson Williams and getting a look at him. There's no wide receiver in this draft. I think we can all agree that is going to have the impact of Jameson Williams. And furthermore, I think even from this point moving forward, I don't know how many wide receivers have as much upside to produce down the line as Jameson Williams. So the obvious need, the cost from both points of view, and the wide receiver position in the draft. Reason number 4, the previous connections. And I've said this from the very beginning. I said it when I was on the air right after the draft. I've said it ever since. The Kenyon Green selection in 2022, it gets brought up a lot. And rightfully so. It's the worst draft pick that Nick Caserio has made. The Texans were originally slated to pick 13th. The pick before the Texans, Jameson Williams went to the Detroit Lions. And I thought at the time, and they'll never admit it, I thought that had Jameson Williams been there, I think there's a chance that the Texans pick Jameson Williams. They can deny it or whatever. We'll never know. But wide receiver was a need. He had the upside. There were a lot of connections. I thought that I thought there was a point that Jameson Williams would have been a Texan. Instead, they traded back a couple times after he was off the board, and they ended up with Kenyon Green. So that's connection number 1. Connection number 2, and I don't know whether these are good connections or bad connections. I just know the connections exist. There's 2 faces of this franchise when it comes to the DeMeco Ryans, Nick Caserio era. One of them is C.J. Stroud on the offensive side of the rock. The other one is Will Anderson, the face of the swarm. C.J. Stroud was at Ohio State with Jameson Williams for 1 season. Now, C.J. did not play that year. Jameson played sparingly, but after that, he transferred to Alabama, where one of his teammates was Will Anderson. Now, I don't know what Will Anderson says about Jameson Williams, but I'm pulling up this picture here. They were both faces of Alabama, and you can see him sharing the podium. After every Alabama game, it was Will Anderson and Jameson Williams. So he probably has a little bit of idea about Jameson Williams. So at the very least, the Texans, they can ask, and again, we're talking about considering. We're not talking about pulling the trigger. They can ask CJ, what do you know about Jameson? They can ask Will, what do you know about Jameson? What was it like when you and Jameson were teammates at Alabama? So you have those connections. The other thing is, you try to think about where, if the Lions are willing to trade Jameson Williams, where would he go? Who would want him? Now, it seems like the Chicago Bears are linked to every trade, and they have a lot of draft ammunition. And Ben Johnson was the offensive coordinator with the Lions when Jameson Williams started to break out, and he was there during his entire tenure. He used him a hell of a lot last year, so I'm assuming that Ben Johnson likes Jameson Williams, the player. But would the Detroit Lions really trade Jameson Williams to a division rival to join the coach that just left their organization? I know I sometimes minimize trades within divisions and conferences. I don't think the Lions would take it that far with the Bears. So the Texans might kind of have an advantage there as well when it comes to Jameson Williams. So the previous connections, I think, matter. And then number 5, the fit and the upside. We've heard Nick Caserio. I asked Nick Caserio about guys that line up in the slot. They want versatility when it comes to wide receivers. They want guys who can line up all over the place. They don't pigeonhole guys. They don't eliminate guys because they might have the same skill sets. We've seen Nick Caley say that. We've heard Nick Caserio say that. And when it comes to versatility and the fit, Jameson Williams is everything that they talk about when it comes to that. As a matter of fact, I pulled this up. This is per Sports Info Solutions last season. Jameson Williams lined up more than 20% of the time in each of the following 4 spots: out wide to the left, in the slot to the left, out wide to the right, and in the slot to the right. So that is position versatility right there. In the upside, it goes without saying, you're not getting a player as good as Jameson Williams and a guy that's going to fit your system. So as we talk about this draft, if the Texans are able to address other needs and they use some of this extra draft equity that they got in the Laramie Tunsil trade, which, by the way, one of the reasons they had to make the Laramie Tunsil trade is because they had to make some tough decisions on good players. It's kind of a similar situation with the Detroit Lions. If some of those extra picks, you sprinkle them in, you get Jameson Williams, I think it makes sense. I think there's at least 5 reasons the Texans should consider a Jameson Williams trade. Number 1, the obvious need. Number 2, the cost. Number 3, the wide receiver position in the draft. Number 4, the previous connections. And number 5, the fit and the upside. Did I leave anything out? Let me know. Subscribe, like, ride along, like the video, subscribe to SNL, join us at our party at the Beer Garden at Carbach for day 3 of the draft Saturday at 11 a.m. And always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. Appreciate y'all for coming through.